The summer of '3 had settled heavy over the Ozark Mountains. The air at Devil's Den State Park carried that strange stillness it sometimes held in the late afternoons. Jason Kline had chosen this place for its reputation as untouched wilderness. But there was another reason he did not tell his followers. He had read about the disappearances. His camera gear weighed against his shoulder as he stepped off the trail into a narrow gap in the trees. Light pooled unevenly on the forest floor. A canopy of oak and hickory bent the day into a dusky twilight. Jason's boots sank into the soft earth where moss swallowed stone. He reached the plateau where the Devil's Den overlook spread out before him. Jagged rock shelves jutted over a deep ravine. From here, the land looked endless, rolling hills, smothered in green. Jason lifted his camera and framed the scene, but the lens caught something strange. At the far side of the rock ledge, a pale shape was standing perfectly still. Jason lowered the camera. The shape was gone. The sound of cicadas pressed in all around him. He steadied his breath. The overlook was silent, except for the faint whisper of leaves far below. He took another step closer to the edge. The ground was loose here, scattered with pebbles that shifted under his boots. He aimed his camera again, zooming in on the shadowed slope of the ravine. A glint of movement caught his eye. Not a bird, not the wind. Something darker, almost human, sliding between the trees and the valley below. His fingers trembled on the camera grip as he tried to capture it. The forest seemed to thicken. Sound bled away until even the cicadas were silent. The air turned heavy, as if the sky itself was pressing down. Jason swallowed hard. A smell rose from the ravine, damp and metallic, like rain on old stone. His pulse quickened. He had heard the stories of hikers who wandered off trail and were never seen again. The official reports said accidents or animal attacks. But the locals told another story. Jason took one more step forward. The ledge beneath his foot crumbled. His body lurched forward, and for a moment the entire valley tilted beneath him. He caught himself on the edge, breathing hard. The sound returned suddenly, but it was wrong. The cicadas were gone. In their place was a low humming that vibrated in his chest. It was coming from below. Jason's eyes fixed on the shadows in the ravine. They were no longer still. They were moving upward. Jason did not remember the walk back to his campsite. One moment the shadows were rising from the ravine, and the next, he was standing at the fire pit staring at the cold ashes. His pack was there. His tent was still pitched. But something was different. The air around the clearing was too still. He could hear no rustle of leaves, no distant calls from other campers. Devil's Den was rarely silent even in the deepest night. Yet now it felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Jason checked his phone. No signal. The battery had drained faster than expected. A faint chill crawled along his spine though. The summer heat still hung thick in the air. He knelt to unzip the tent. The zipper felt colder than it should have. Inside his sleeping bag was unrolled, but the fabric felt damp. Not with rain. With something that smelled faintly of stone and earth like the ravine below. Jason stepped back sharply. His camera lay on the ground beside the tent. He picked it up and checked the memory card. The last image was strange. It showed the overlook, but the sky above it was dark as if night had fallen in an instant. And in the distance at the tree line stood that pale shape again. Only this time it was closer. Its head was tilted as though listening. Jason's breath came uneven. He set the camera down. A soft sound came from beyond the edge of his campsite. It was like fabric brushing against bark. He turned, but the woods were empty. The light was fading faster than it should have. A dull orange glow slipped low across the treetops, though he had not seen the sun set. Jason built a fire, but the flames seemed smaller, weaker. He sat on the log beside the fire pit listening. The silence had weight now. It pressed into his ears until he could hear the sound of his own heartbeat. A branch cracked in the distance. He turned quickly. At the far side of the clearing between two trees, something pale shifted. Jason stared without moving. The firelight trembled as if a wind had passed, though the air remained still. The pale shape was no longer at the edge of the clearing. It was closer now. Night in Devil's Den was different from other forests. The darkness did not just fall, it spread like water, soaking every branch and stone. Jason sat by the fire, but the light seemed swallowed before it could reach the trees. The pale shape was gone, yet he felt the weight of unseen eyes in the blackness. Every shift of the wind sounded like a footstep, every groan of the trees like something breathing. Jason tightened his grip on the flashlight, though he had not turned it on. The small flame from the fire seemed safer than breaking the darkness. He listened. The sound of footsteps came again, soft and deliberate, just beyond the circle of light. He told himself it was another camper. But no voice followed, no sound of gear, no beam of light moving through the woods. The steps stopped, then came a faint tapping like fingernails against wood. Jason turned slowly toward the sound. Between the trees there was movement. Not running, not walking, but drifting. The pale shape was closer than before, its edges blurring, as if the air bent around it. The fire sputtered. Shadows twisted on the ground, stretching toward the shape. Jason's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He could see details now. It was tall, its limbs too long, its head bowed slightly forward. There was no face, only a smooth surface where eyes should be. The sound louder. Jason backed toward the tent, his boots crunching softly on the dirt. He reached the flap but froze. There was a new sound now. It was coming from inside the tent. A soft dragging, like something moving along the fabric from the inside. Jason stared at the dark outline of the sleeping bag. It shifted once as though something had rolled over inside it. The fire snapped loudly, and the light flared for a brief second. In that moment, Jason saw the pale shape not at the edge of the trees but directly behind his tent. Jason could not breathe. The pale figure loomed just beyond the fire, its smooth head bent at an unnatural angle. The shadows behind it writhed like living things stretching toward him. The fire sank lower, as if something was drawing the heat out of it. The cold hit him hard, his breath turning white even in the summer night. Jason stepped back, his heel catching on a root. His flashlight slipped from his hand, landing in the dirt, beam snapping on by accident. The light cut through the dark and caught the figure, full in its shape. It did not recoil. Instead, it began to move with slow, deliberate steps, its long arms swaying slightly, its legs barely lifting from the ground. Jason stumbled toward the tent, but the sound from inside stopped him cold. The sleeping bag shifted again, this time with a low, wet sound, like something heavy, dragging inside. The pale figure was closer now, the distance shrinking without sound. Jason could feel the pressure in the air, the way the silence pressed down on everything until even the crackle of the fire was gone. He turned sharply toward the trees, thinking to run, but the woods looked wrong. The trunks were too close together, twisting upward at strange angles, as if the forest itself was bending to block his way. The figure stepped into the circle of firelight. Its surface was not skin, but something gray and cracked like dry clay. The smooth place where its face should have been rippled once, as though something beneath was trying to push through. Jason's legs locked. A sound rose in the air, deep and low, not from the figure's body, but from the earth beneath them. The fire collapsed into embers, sending a brief wave of heat before vanishing into dark. The figure was right in front of him now. The surface of its face cracked slightly, and for the first time Jason saw what lay beneath. A hollow space blacker than the night around them. Jason's vision swam as the cold rushed over him. The forest seemed to tilt. His last thought before the dark took him was that the hollow space was not empty. Something inside was looking back at him. Jason woke to the sound of water dripping. His eyes opened slowly, and the first thing he noticed was the color of the light. It was not the golden light of morning, but a cold, pale gray that seemed to come from nowhere. He was lying on the ground. The tent was gone. The fire pit was gone. Around him the forest looked wrong. The trees were darker, their bark cracked and wet, as if the rain had been falling for years. Jason tried to stand, but his legs felt heavy. His camera strap dug into his shoulder, and for a moment he was afraid to check it. When he finally lifted the display screen was black. Then an image flickered on. It was the overlook where he had stood on the first day, but the sky was darker, and the valley below was filled with mist. In the foreground, barely visible, was the pale figure standing exactly where he had been. Jason dropped the camera. The sound of dripping grew louder. It was coming from somewhere to his left. He turned and saw the old stone shelter, a structure he had not passed before. Its roof was broken, and the stones were covered in dark moss. The doorway yawned black and empty. Something moved inside, a slow dragging sound like wet cloth across the floor. Jason stepped back, but his heel hit something. He looked down. It was the sleeping bag from his tent. It was lying open and empty, yet the fabric was still moving, as if something had just crawled out. The forest around him seemed to close in. The path he had come from was gone, replaced by more twisted trees. He could feel that same pressure in the air, the same heavy silence that had fallen the night before. The dragging sound from the stone shelter stopped. The doorway was still empty, but Jason knew without doubt that something was standing just inside. The pale gray light dimmed further, as though the sky itself was fading. Jason's pulse pounded in his head. He turned in a slow circle. No matter which direction he faced, the forest looked the same, and then he heard it. A second set of footsteps. Behind him, moving slowly through the wet leaves. Jason spun toward the sound, but the forest was empty. The footsteps had stopped, yet the silence felt heavier than before. Through the trees he saw movement. Again, but this time it was not the pale figure. It was a man in a dark green uniform, a park ranger. Relief hit him like air after drowning. Jason called out, though his voice felt small in the strange, thick air. The ranger did not answer. He walked slowly along the twisted trail, his head slightly bowed. Jason hurried toward him, but the distance did not seem to close. Every step felt heavier. Finally, Jason reached the ranger and touched his shoulder. The man stopped, but did not turn. His head tilted in a strange, sharp angle, as if listening to something far away. Jason stepped back, unease crawling into his chest. The last. His face was wrong. His eyes were pale gray like the sky above the trees, and his skin had the same cracked, dry texture as the figure from the night. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came, only that deep, low hum Jason had heard by the ravine. Jason stumbled backward. The ranger took one slow step toward him. The sound grew louder, vibrating in Jason's bones. Behind the ranger in the distance, Jason saw shapes moving between the trees. More pale forms drifting closer. The ranger lifted his hand and pointed toward the stone shelter. Jason shook his head, stepping back, but the air shifted. The path behind him had closed again, swallowed by the forest. The only way forward was toward the shelter. The ranger's mouth moved again. No words, only the hum. But Jason felt the meaning in his chest. It was not a request. It was an instruction. Jason turned toward the shelter. The dragging sound had started. Again. Jason stepped toward the stone shelter, each step heavier than the last, as though the ground wanted to hold him back. The doorway loomed wider, darker, its edges slick with moss. The air grew colder, and the smell of damp stone filled his lungs. Inside, the light dimmed further, though no wall blocked it. The gray glow outside seemed to die at the threshold. Jason hesitated, but the sound from within pulled him forward, that slow dragging like something shifting just out of sight. The interior was larger than it looked from the outside. The walls stretched back into shadow carved with markings Jason did not recognize. Symbols crude but deliberate, scored deep into the stone as if they had been scratched over and over for years. The dragging sound stopped. The silence was total, again pressing into his ears. Jason's breath echoed too loudly in the space. He turned slowly, scanning the dark dot. At the far end of the shelter, something pale rested on the floor. Jason stepped closer, his boots crunching softly on grit. It was a backpack, old and torn, the fabric stiff with age. A name tag still clung to one strap, faded but just visible. It was not his. He crouched to inspect it and saw more scattered belongings. Around the floor, a camera cracked open, a hiking boot lying on its side, a torn map. The objects looked as if they had been here for years, untouched by weather, yet not by time. Jason's stomach twisted. These were the things from the disappearances. A new sound rose behind him. Not dragging this time, but the soft, careful sound of bare feet on stone. He turned sharply, but the doorway was empty. Something moved in the corner. The pale figure stepped out of the shadow, its head tilted, just as before, but now there were others behind it, shapes without faces, filling the shelter, their bodies blocking the exit. The hum returned, low and deep, vibrating the stone itself. Jason stumbled back against the wall, the carved symbols cold under his hands. The figures moved closer, the air tightening, the light fading. The last thing Jason saw before the dark surged again was the smooth face of the nearest figure, bending close until that hollow black space filled his vision. Jason opened his eyes to darkness, but it was not the same dark as the shelter. This was heavier, almost physical, pressing against his skin. The air was colder and his breath came in shallow bursts. He pushed himself up slowly. The stone beneath his hands was damp but smooth, unlike the rough walls of the shelter. As his eyes adjusted, he saw faint shapes around him. Towering columns of rock stretched upward, but they bent at impossible angles. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the ground. Jason turned in a slow circle, but there was no sign of the doorway, no sign of the shelter at all. He was standing in a vast hollow space lit by a pale gray glow that had no source. Far in the distance, movement stirred. The pale figures were here too, their shapes drifting slowly across the floor of the hollow. They moved with the same strange rhythm, arms swaying slightly, heads bowed, as if listening to something deep beneath them. Jason took a step back, and his boot struck something. He looked down and saw another camera lying in the dust. Its screen was cracked, but it flickered to life for a moment, showing an image of the overlook from high above. In the photo, dozens of pale shapes were gathered at the edge, looking outward. He dropped the camera, his heart racing. The hum deepened, becoming almost like a voice, though no words could be understood. It seemed to come from below, as if the ground itself was speaking. Jason moved toward the edge of the hollow, but every path bent subtly, guiding him back toward the center. No matter which direction he took, the figures seemed closer, their heads still bowed. The air grew colder, his breath fogged. He realized the pale shapes were no longer drifting. They had stopped. Every one of them now faced him directly, though their heads remained lowered. A vibration shook the ground. Jason looked down. The smooth stone beneath his feet was cracking in a wide circle around him. Through the fissures, a blackness deeper. Then night began to seep upward. The blackness seeped upward, filling the cracks in the stone floor like liquid shadow. The hum grew deeper, vibrating in Jason's bones until his teeth ached. The pale figures did not move, but the circle they had formed around him tightened. The cracks widened. A sound rose from below, not the low hum anymore, but a deep, layered tone, as if countless voices were speaking at once. None of the words made sense, but the meaning burned in Jason's mind. He staggered back, but there was nowhere to go. Every step brought him closer to another pale figure there, bowed heads turning slightly as he moved past. The air was heavy and cold, the pale light dimming further until the hollow space seemed to pulse with the shadow. The floor shifted. Jason fell to his knees as the stone beneath him dipped. From the largest crack, a shape began to rise. It was not solid at first, more like smoke, twisting upward. As it rose, the pale figures dropped to their knees, their heads lowering further in unison. The smoke hardened. into form tall and formless at once, its edges shifting like waves. In the place where a face should have been, there was only a vast hollow dark that pulled at Jason's vision. The voices grew louder until they filled the air completely. The pale figures began to sway, their movements perfectly matched. The stone beneath Jason's hands felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with the voices. Jason tried to stand, but his body felt heavy, as if the air itself had weight. The hollow face bent closer to him, the darkness inside seeming endless. For a moment, Jason thought he saw shapes moving within it, faces, hands, fragments of things lost. The cold surged through him, freezing his breath. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw before everything went dark again was the hollow shape extending one hand toward him, its fingers impossibly long and thin. Jason woke again, but this time, there was no sky above him, only the ceiling of the stone shelter dim in the gray light of morning. The cold was gone, replaced by heavy damp air. His camera lay beside him, the lens cracked. He stood slowly, every muscle aching. The shelter looked different now, smaller, older, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The doorway was empty. The forest beyond was silent. Jason stepped outside. The clearing where his campsite had been was empty. No tent, no fire pit. The path he had taken to the overlook was gone, replaced by a tangle of trees. He checked this was dead. The screen reflected his face, pale and drawn. For a moment the reflection seemed wrong, the shape of his head tilting at the same strange angle as the pale figures. He dropped the phone hard against the ground. The forest remained silent as he walked. Every tree looked the same. The air felt thick and heavy. He could not tell how long he had been walking before he saw the overlook ahead. The view was unchanged. The valley spread out below, covered in mist. Jason raised the broken camera, almost without thinking. He framed the shot and pressed the shutter. The image appeared on the cracked screen. It showed the overlook, the valley, and a pale figure standing exactly where he was. Jason felt the air grow colder. He lowered the camera. The mist in the valley shifted, rising slowly toward the overlook. The hum began again, faint at first, then louder, until it drowned the sound of the wind. Jason stepped back, but the ground felt loose beneath his boots. The mist reached the edge of the overlook, curling upward around him. In the pale, swirling gray, he thought he saw shapes, drifting heads, bowed, moving in perfect unison. The hum deepened. The cold surged again. The last thing Jason saw, before the mist closed over him, was the hollow shape standing among the pale figures, its dark face turned toward him. The valley fell silent. The overlook stood empty. 2 weeks after Jason, Kline was reported missing. A small search team moved through Devil's Den. The park had been quiet since summer's peak, and most trails were empty. Ranger Collins walked ahead, scanning the ground. The disappearance was not unusual for the area, but something about this one felt heavier. The weather was clear, yet the air carried that strange stillness the locals never liked to talk about. The team reached the old stone shelter near a narrow ridge. Collins paused. The structure looked older than he remembered, the roof sagging, the stone slick with moss. Inside, the air was cold. The walls were carved with old markings, most weathered away but still faintly visible. In the far corner, something lay half covered in dust. Collins bent down and brushed the dirt aside. It was a camera, cracked and worn. The memory card was still inside. Later that evening at the ranger station, Collins plugged the card into his computer. Most of the files were damaged, but a few images remained. The first showed the overlook bathed in a gray light, the valley covered in mist. The second showed the same overlook, but now a pale figure stood at the edge, facing the camera. The last image was different. It showed the interior of the stone shelter, from the perspective of someone standing just inside. In the photo, the doorway was visible, but the view outside was not forest. It was a valley covered in mist, and in the mist, dozens of pale figures stood with their heads bowed. Collins removed the card and slid it into a drawer. He closed the laptop slowly. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. For a moment, he thought. He heard it, the low hum rising faintly from the direction of the ridge. Afterward, extract from the incident. Report Arkansas State Parks Division of Search and Rescue Case File 23447. Subject Jason Kline, age 28, last seen entering Devil's Den State Park June 17, 2023. Solo camper and travel content creator. Timeline of search. June 21, 2023. Campsite discovered unoccupied near an unmarked section of trail. Tent and personal items missing. June 25, 2023. Camera recovered from interior of abandoned stone shelter. Shelter not listed on current park maps. June 28, 2023. Search suspended due to hazardous terrain and unstable weather conditions. Notes from Ranger Collins. Unusual environmental conditions noted near shelter. Reports of dense mist at valley overlook during clear weather. Audio anomalies recorded but not identified. Current status case remains open. Location of subject unknown. Camera and images retained in evidence. Recommendation: restrict access to unmarked trails leading toward stone shelter and adjacent ridge. Final entry, July 29, 2023. Mist observed, again near overlook. Audio hum detected. No visual confirmation of figures reported by witness.